The following program is a Town of Colonie television production of the William K. Sanford Town Library.
Well, it is nice to be here.
Yep.
Am I okay?
Yep.
Yeah. I've been around for a long time. As a matter of fact, this is the William K. Sanford Town Library, and Mr. Sanford and his wife were members of Trinity Institution. Hi, Shirley. And so I knew them. And so it's really nice to be here in the library that's named after him. So thanks for inviting me. Let me tell you just a little bit. I'm going to try to do this. Is a difficult book to do. How many people have actually read the book? Oh, good. That'll make it easier. So I'll allow you to ask me some questions, and so we can do some little discussion around this book. But before that, I just want to give you some background and introduce it. And I want to say that my parents, who were from the South, never talked to their children about racism, and the terrible times that they experienced in the South, because it wasn't something that you do. You wanted to protect your children from all the terrible things that you saw in the world. This past 3 years, there have been, and you're probably aware of it, a number of police shootings of black males, and the names are huge right now. The first one was Trayvon Martin. Even though he was not shot by a police officer, it got the community around the area where he was and the rest of the country and the world to start talking about this issue of protecting black males. Then we heard about Michael Brown in Ferguson, Eric Gardner in Staten Island, and there Tamir Rice in Cleveland, Freddie Gray. There's a whole list of names that you're probably aware of. And the question came up for many parents, again, was how do we talk about this? Because so many black males are now being killed as they saw it. Because of social media and the public media, everyone became more aware of those kinds of killings. But unfortunately, 2013, 14, and 15 were really not that unusual. It's just that now everybody started seeing it. There were videos, you could see what happened to these people, and parents were concerned. How do I talk to my children? Particularly, how do I talk to my son about the dangers that there are in our community and across the country? So one of the things, responses to this was Ta-Nehisi Coates decided that he wanted to respond to this problem, and he did it by writing this book. But I thought maybe the best way to do this is to give you just a little background, because there really are a number of books that have been written for the same reason, to respond to what was going on in the country at a particular time. And so I'm going to mention several books as I talk about this book, because I think it will help you, especially if you haven't read the book. It might help you. Ta-Nehisi Coates is a reporter, a journalist, and he's written a number of articles and essays about some of these issues aside from the book. One of them was a case for reparations, and the other had to do with mass incarceration and the black family. So he was very familiar with everything that was going on. There are, as I said, several black authors who have done books in response to things that were going on, and I want to mention them. And one was James Baldwin, who wrote The Fire Next Time. Khalil Muhammad, who wrote a book called The Condemnation of Blackness. Now, James Baldwin's book was written in 1963, and it was the 100th anniversary of freedom, so-called freedom. And Khalil Muhammad wrote his book in 2010. It's called The Condemnation of Blackness, where he looks at the issue of criminality, because this is tied to policing and what's going on in mass incarceration. And of course, Michelle Alexander also wrote a book in 2010 called The New Jim Crow. And it looked at mass incarceration in the age of color blindness. So, how many of you have read James Baldwin's book? So you're familiar with that. What about Khalil Muhammad's Condemnation of Blackness? That is a difficult book. So, but it's a very important book. And what about Michelle Alexander's New Jim Crow? Well, anyway, Mr. Coates actually was very influenced by these books. And so a lot of what he says really is focused, you know, in his book. A lot of the things that were focused in the other books are part of his book. So it's really important, if you get a chance to read any of those other books, I think you should. It'll help you understand Mr. Coates' book, which, as I said, is very difficult. So I'm going to sort of compare it to, first of all, we're going to sort of compare his book to James Baldwin's book, tell you what some of the similarities are and some of the differences, and then talk a little bit about some of the concepts that he throws out in his book. And it's also, you have to think of it as a memoir, because he talks a lot about his life and how it developed, how he sees racism and the response to it in his world. James Baldwin, who wrote the Fire Next Time, what he does is he tries to write a letter to his nephew to explain to him what's going on in the world in 1963, which was the Civil Rights Movement era. Okay, so he uses that format to talk to his son about these issues. He, as I said, it's in the 60s, and the purpose of the book, of course, was to talk about race and racism and how do you survive as a young man in this country when you are black. And that's the focus of it. He also talks a little bit about the church. He's disillusioned by the role of the church in the black community. And they both talk about that, as a matter of fact. So there are a lot of similarities. They also talk about how do you respond and what the vision is for these young people. James Baldwin is perhaps more hopeful, because as he talks to his nephew about race and racism, what it's like in the ghetto, what are the realities of it, he holds out some hope. He says that it's your responsibility to understand what the world is like and how to deal with it. Coates, on the other hand, people will argue, does not hold out much hope. He says racism is here, it's alive, it's thriving, and it's going to be very, very difficult to get rid of racism in our lifetime. So a lot of people have been very critical of the book because they think it's a negative kind of a book that does not hold out any hope. And that is a real problem for many people. Now, what he does, Coates does in his book, he does talk about how he has developed his own perspective about the world and what it looks like, and what he has to make sure that his son knows in order to protect him. And so I just want to sort of focus on some of those concepts that he throws out. One is he explains about white people. First of all, he says that white people are really people who call themselves white, but they're not really white. So white is and he says that they believe that they are superior and that they have a need to appear to be above everyone else, and that's why they want to be white. They are dreamers. They have come up with a concept of race that is not based in reality. Race is a social construct, and we approach it as if it's something that's we were created with. But race is something that white people created from his perspective. They made themselves white, and they made us black. And they did that for a purpose. They also created this concept of color, white, black, and they did it in a very violent kind of way. He looks very closely at history and how white people define themselves, how they related to people of color, how they stole their land, how they destroyed their lives. All of that says white people really were very violent. And he looks at slavery a lot. History is important to him. He looks at that whole concept of slavery. And one of the things I liked about this book is when he talks about slavery, he says you have to remember that we're not talking about a general concept. We're talking about people. We're talking about individuals. And too often in our society, we forget that we're talking about human beings. And so he sees that as a real problem. So he has obviously some real problems with white people. This book is written for black people. But I think it's good for white people to read it because I think it will help you understand some of the things that are of concern to us. The other concept he focuses on is the one of body. He focuses a lot on bodies, black bodies, and black bodies are incorporate everything about the human being. So when you destroy a black body, you're destroying everything. As I said, Baldwin has some problems with the church, spirituality, religion, okay? But I think the concept of seeing that every person you talk about has to be thought of as an individual is a very important one, because we tend to lump people in categories, and when we talk about people being, even in war, we talk about people as numbers, but we don't talk about them as human beings. So when you destroy someone, you're destroying not only that person's body, but the person's whole history, all the things that went to make up this person, the parents, the family, the education of this person, all those things are destroyed. And when you're dead, you're dead. Okay, there's no thinking about life afterwards, or you'll have your glory in heaven, which is one of the problems he has with religion. So the body is very, very important to him. People respond to us based on their ideas of what that body encompasses. The body is black, and there's all kinds of things associated with being black and your body being black. So he also talks about how we devalue black bodies, and therefore you can do anything to them. And we certainly see that police can approach black men, and if they don't value them and their bodies, that's one way of destroying them. And we destroy in really different ways. And the other point he makes is that we as black people don't have control of our bodies. Somebody else controls the body. And again, he points to police officers. They can destroy your body. So he talks a lot about that. But the body is very important. He also talks about destruction of black beauty. And if you do that, you will allow someone to do anything to your body. And he talks about the ways that black people oftentimes try to change their body so that white people will accept them. And for instance, like Michael Jackson, who tried to change his color and his hair and all of that. But it is important for blacks to seize, control of their bodies. And he really appreciates and respects all the blacks who've gone before them who he thinks had more control over their bodies than we do currently. And that's people like Malcolm X, for instance. He appreciates Malcolm X because he sees Malcolm X as sort of free and has control of his body. The other thing he focuses a lot on is the ghetto. And James Baldwin does the same thing. Baldwin says that his nephew was put into a ghetto with no expectation that he could ever get out of it, and that the ghetto would destroy him as it does most black people. Coates refers to the ghetto as, quote, the killing field, which is very interesting because he also accepts the fact that many people die because they live in the ghetto for many different reasons and in many different ways. But it all boils down to their black skin from his perspective. So looking at the ghetto, and if you read the book, you'll find that he describes it in many, many different ways and talks about many of the problems that exist in the ghettos and how dangerous it could be. He also, as he develops his whole perspective, he talks about his life in Baltimore, where he experienced many, many different problems related to poverty and racism. One of them was school and what school means to him. He didn't see school as a place to learn, which was the sad part. He saw schools as an escape, he says, from death or prison, which is a very sad comment to make about the place that you live. Okay? But that was what his life was. And in the book, he describes in great detail what it was like to be living in Baltimore in the ghetto. The fact that it was fraught with all kinds of things, not only drugs, but the violence that he talks about was there. The other concept he focuses a lot on is fear. And what he says is that the ghetto, the racism, the race, all of this treatment by white people has really caused many black males to be fearful, actually black people to be fearful in so many different ways. And when he talks about fear, I'd like to point out, if I can find his book, that fear is something that permeates everything in our lives, whether you are male or female. Fear is the great destroyer, but it's present in just about everything that we do. It's really helpful when he talks about fear to understand what he's talking about, because he says many things that people do, particularly black males, are done out of fear. We look at them, we look at young boys with baggy pants and hoodies, all of this. But he says many times this is done, the clothing, the culture is done out of fear. You're trying to take control of your body, okay? And I think I found that to be very, very helpful. Let me read a section where he says about fear. He says, "The fear was there in extravagant boys of my neighborhood, in their large rings and medallions, their big puffy coats, and full-length fur-collared leathers, which was their armor against their world. I think you probably see it sometimes with sunglasses. People are trying to hide hoodies. Sometimes they're trying to hide because they're fearful of the world that they know does not value them. They would stand on a corner of Gwen Oak and Liberty, or Cold Spring and Park Heights to outside Madawan Mall with their hands dipped in Russell sweat. I think back on those boys now, and all I see is fear. And all I see in them girding themselves against the ghosts of the bad old days when the Mississippi mob gathered round their grandfathers so that the branches of the black body might be torched, then cut away. He always looks at history and all the terrible things that happened to black people in this country, and history is always present. But he goes on to talk more about how he hears fear in music, some of the rap music. They're trying to be masters of their own lives, their own streets, and their own bodies. So we have to look at it differently. As I mentioned, history is also quite prevalent in his book. He talks a lot about history and the struggle and the power of ancestors, of their ancestors. As I mentioned, there are a number of people that he admired. As I said, Malcolm X was only one of them, but Nat Turner and Harriet Tubman, the Panthers, his parents were, and his father was part of the Panthers, and so he's always aware of that. But the struggle, he appreciates the struggle that took place during the older days, and that it takes refuge sometimes in that struggle, because that struggle is so important, and that is one of the ways that you can sort of have some control, because those people did. The other thing that he finds really important in his life is Howard University. As I said, he did not appreciate his life in Baltimore and the schools that he attended, but he goes to Howard, and I think this is also another piece of the book that you really should pay a lot of attention to, because when he calls Howard University the Mecca. He was so fascinated by the people who gathered at Howard and what they represented, and they were so diverse in the sense that they came from so many different places, but they were all there sharing and all part of a diaspora that he was just so happy to be a part of. So Howard University, he talks about it all the time. If you've ever seen any interviews with him, that's one of the first things he does. He talks about Howard. He wears a Howard t-shirt lots of the time. And Howard is, to him, one of the best things of his life. Policing, again, he focuses on, because at Howard, he met a friend called Prince. And then in the second part of the book, he spends a lot of time talking about what happened to Prince, who was killed by police officers. And it calls into question, how we're ever going to have control of our bodies. And for him, it became real. The whole thing about police killings became so real because it happened to someone who was close to him. And so he also developed a relationship with Prince's mother. And it raises so many questions for him about this society and how white America relates to blacks, and even how the system is designed to destroy, whether you are black and working in that system or white. So a lot of the criminal justice issues that we've been focused on for a long time is discussed in that part of the book through the policing problem. The other thing that he certainly talks about a lot is And with his son, he wants to make sure that he understands the reality of being black in America. And so you have to talk about the truth of all that. So truth for him is very, very important. And some people have been, again, very critical because we have different ways of talking about this in the community. Some will say that you should not talk to children about those horrible things that happened, or like my parents, because it really destroys their optimism, their energy to get out of the ghetto, that you just don't talk about those kinds of things. But he says, I thought a lot about that, but I came down on the side of believing that it's more important to tell my son the truth. He has to know what it is like to be black in America. And how do you navigate all of these systems that are designed to destroy you? And so, as I said, he spends a lot of time on doing that. Now, I've already mentioned in terms of his vision, what can his son expect and what should his son do to try to survive in America. He says, and I think this is the sad part when he ends the first chapter, he says, the birth of a better world is not ultimately up to you. The struggle is important, but you're not going to be able to change the racism that exists in this country and the devaluation of your body. And I think that for me was a very sad commentary. Personally, after I read the book, I read it a couple of times because you sort of have to. It sort of made me question what I do. Because at one point he says for his son, you have to remember that you don't do things just because they make white people feel comfortable. And as we deal with a lot of issues that we deal with in the community, sometimes we all think that we have to do something that makes other people feel comfortable, that allows them to get away with certain things that are done to you and to other people, and that you don't make enough challenges in your community because you think that it's going to harm somebody or they're not going to feel good about you, all those kinds of things. And he says that is a very dangerous thing to do. You have to be true to yourself, and you have to do what you think is right. And the struggle, he also says he really loves this country. He really loves this country. He loves life, and struggle is where it's at. And for him, the hope piece, he sees Howard University as the hope. The university where people can come together, share ideas, and learn from each other. So I think that that sort of makes up for some of the things that I think people were saying in terms of the negative pieces to the book. This book, as I said, it's a short book, but it's filled with so much information and ideas and thoughts that it really does take a couple of readings to do that. And since some of you have read the book, I thought we'd spend some time with your reacting to the book, reacting to some of the points that I brought up, or helping us understand and also your perspective on the book. Because everybody who reads the book that I've talked to, they have a different read about this book. They get different things from it. So I think it would be helpful to sort of have that kind of discussion with the time that we have left. So I'll open it up. Yes.
He also mentions going to France and
Yes.
contrasting that culture with the American culture, that he's disappointed in because of the different history.
Right.
And he also, this concept of being a dreamer, which is the racist concept. Doesn't matter whether you're black or white,
Right.
the black police officer that shot his friend. If you're having that mode of thinking, well, I was sad too because toward the end of the book, my impression was he doesn't see any improvement in our society at all. And then he crescendos on the third to last page. I'm just going to read. He says, he's talking about the dream, getting beyond race. And he says, technology, he says, once the dreamer's parameters were caged by technology, by the limits of horsepower and wind, but no longer. And this revolution has freed the dreamers to plunder not just the bodies of humans, but the body of the earth itself. So he's going beyond racism. He's talking about environmental destruction. So he really takes off at the end of the book. It's beyond the racism issue.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned about France. I think, maybe somebody can correct me, I think he's in France now because he talks about when he was taught French, which he saw absolutely no value in teaching this ghetto kid French. He didn't know what he was going to do with it. It made no sense to him whatsoever. But he came to appreciate it. His son is in France, and his wife, of course, taught him to appreciate French culture. And so I think he just moved to France for a while. I don't know how long he plans on being there. But yeah, he talks about a lot of things. Did you see anything positive in that statement that you just read?
Well, I disagree with the level of his negativity. I mean, if he sees a big contrast in a better world in France, and I think there are pockets of our world in the United States as well that are more progressive. And if he's going to crescendo to merging the racism issue, which he says, let's just pray for this because there's nothing we can do about it. This whole, we have environmental movements here. We have a lot of thinking. It's about the earth. He's saying this dream thought. It's like it's a continuum from colonialism. It's like economic power, achievement, the American dream. That's what
But he raises a lot of questions. I think this book, it's a memoir in a sense, but it only covers part of his life. He also admits that he's growing and he's developing. And I heard him talk a little while ago, and he talked about some of the positive. He said there have been some positive changes in this world. So I think, he's young and he's experiencing a lot of different experiences. He went to France. Now, he also, as I said, James Baldwin did the same thing. And a lot of the black writers felt that, it's different in France. And it is. I mean, I've been to France many times, and it's a whole different feel from being in France. You don't, when I first went there, I thought people were going to look at me and say, because I didn't see any other black faces around. I said people are going to stare at me like they do in the North Country in New York. And I was shocked. I mean, I'm out in, this rural area in France, and nobody's paying attention to me. And I'm sort of, what is going on here? But it's different. You feel a little freer in France. And I'm not saying France is, doesn't have problems of racism and so on, but it is different. And you do feel that little bit of freedom when people aren't always gawking at you, and you don't feel they have the same kinds of stereotypes and feelings about you. So no, I don't know what he'll get. He's in France. Maybe I'm sure he's growing. He's always going to be growing. But what he says about racism and the history, those are things that are real. in America, and we have to understand it and accept it and try to work on changing it. Yeah. Okay, I'll go over the side. Thanks. Yeah.
Yes. Hi, Alice.
Hi.
Remember me?
Yeah, I do. Where have you been?
I retired.
Oh, okay.
But my name is Yvonne. I'm a retired history teacher. I taught for many years at Albany High School, and I've worked at some other schools in the area. And when the government sent me a Medicare card, I said, okay, it's time for me to retire. But I saw an interview that Melissa Harris Perry did with this author, and I was listening to what he said, and so I decided to download the book, and I'm still reading it. I have not finished. But I want to respond to something that you said and something that this gentleman said about fear. And my parents also were from the segregated South, and they did talk to us, my sister and I, when we were growing up, occasionally about some of the things that they experienced. They didn't want us to be fearful. They moved up north to New York and were optimistic of a better lifestyle. So they didn't want us to grow up to be fearful, but there was always that little voice of caution, you know. You should look a certain way or dress a certain way or speak a certain way so you're not seen as being threatening. Okay. And for the most part, I did what I was supposed to do. I did well in school. I got a good job. I got, married, house in the suburbs, and all those things. And I have been feeling somewhat secure and optimistic that the future was getting better. But right now, at this particular moment, I feel the fear. I'm becoming very fearful of the future, and I don't like that feeling. But what I am seeing going on in our political scene makes me very, very fearful. And I'll give you a specific example. Yesterday on the television, they were interviewing some people who were supporters of Donald Trump. And
that's fearful enough.
Well, the thing is, they were trying to find out who are these people, what is their mindset, why do you support this person with such a passion? And the lady that was being interviewed, and I'm sure she was quite sincere, which is also fearful, something to be fearful. But she said, that he says things that she feels, but that he comes out and he says it. And then she made two statements that really, I just wanted to jump through the television, because she said, this country was founded by white people. And I think she fears that they are losing that control. So when she says the country is founded by white people, the history teacher part of me wanted to jump through the screen and say, but black people were here before the Mayflower, and black people, the Crispus Attucks was the first one to get killed in the Revolution, and I just.
Don't forget Native Americans.
Yeah. How about that? But the whole thing, and she was being brutally honest in how she felt that somehow they were losing their country, control of the country. And then the other thing that she said that made me want to jump through the television was about Barack Obama, and she said that she's still not sure whether he was, born in America, and she said I don't want to call him a racist but I think he is because he seems like he's for the black people. And my fear is that if there's all these people at these rallies who have that same mindset, if you see Barack Obama as being for the black people, what about the 46 other presidents that came before him? Can you take the converse and say that because they were white, that they were just for white people? I mean, somehow the idea that if we had a black man or a man of any color in the White House, that he's only going to be for black people, and Barack Obama has walked such a fine line, trying not to appear to be overly pro-black, but except when things happen like Trayvon. I mean, there are things that happen where he just has to come out and speak as a black man and how it makes him feel. But I am afraid. I am afraid if this is the threat that some people, not all, but they're out there, and they're out there in droves, and I didn't realize how much of a nerve this message is resonating.
Right.
It scares me.
Yeah, I think that's the whole thing around the Trump thing. I think he's tapping into a lot of people's fears, and there was a point in time when Barack Obama was elected that everybody sort of said, "Oh, at last we've gotten rid of racism," kind of thing. But that wasn't the case, obviously. And so he's picking up on, I think, a lot of those hidden fears. And now it's okay to say things that were not okay to say a few years back. We're getting to feel comfortable with talking about immigrants and all of the other religious groups that we didn't talk about before. So it's made it comfortable for people to do that, and that is really offers a great deal of concern, I think, to a lot of people. Also, in terms of the numbers of the population as it changes, there are those who are quite fearful because all of a sudden you're going to be a minority, but you still got control of the money and all the institutions, but there are people who fear that being a minority, maybe there's a little bit of concern because we know how we've treated minorities in the past, and some people might believe that the tables might be turned. I don't know, but the fear is definitely there. He's tapping into the fear and the racism that's still there, but hasn't been allowed to be expressed in certain kinds of ways. Until now, you can do it, So that is fearful. Yes.
I think that this book is a gift. This coach experienced these things. This is how he grew up. This is what happened to him, and this is his thoughts on the subject. It doesn't necessarily have to be mine, all told, but a lot of it is stuff that should be out there. And most people are not aware of what it is like to live in the ghetto, to grow up that way, to be a minority, etc. And he's really given us a gift. And I think the fact that he's at the top of the New York Times bestseller list says something about our willingness to listen.
Right.
And that's all he's asking, is that these are his thoughts, and this is how he came to them. I think it's marvelous.
Yeah, thank you. I think you're right. As I said, I've read the book a couple of times. I plan to read it some more because I did see it as a gift. It was difficult at first getting into it, but then he got me thinking about so many things, about who I was, some of the experiences I could connect with. But I was also learning about a new generation. I mean, he talks about his son. He says, I don't know what it's like to have been raised in a country with a black president. That's a whole new thing. We never could conceive of that, at least in my generation, that there would ever be a black president and to grow up in a society that has one. So you're right. You should look at it as a gift. Should all read it. As I said, his thing when he was doing this book was he's writing it to his son and it's written for a black person and for black people, but wanting everybody to understand what the black experience is like and what it has been like in this country for so long. So I agree with you. It is a gift. Thank you for that. Yes.
I guess I disagree that it's a pessimistic outlook. From the way I read the book, what I thought was very positive about it was that he creates new language for describing a problem. And what I was going to say to you was, my advice to you is to go home, cancel your Time Warner subscription, call me in the morning. I'll feel much better, I guarantee. But I'm sorry. That, you know, and this is part of it, that there are so many cliched phrases that seem to get regurgitated in these conversations that they start to lack meaning. And he creates some new language here, this idea of a dreamer. You know, it's something that was kind of unique. And it's almost like, all of a sudden your synapses have to go in a different direction now.
Right.
You're more attuned
And people
to
who
it.
call themselves white. Yeah. I mean, it's a great concept.
Yeah.
No, I agree. A lot of people see it as a negative, pessimistic book. And you know, some of the phrases are taken out and they can convey something very negative. But he says he's surprised when people say that to him. Wow, I never thought of this as being a negative book. But it's reality based, I think. That's the thing. And that's why so many people, I think, see it as being very negative. But he says, for me, there's hope in this book. And he again goes back to Howard University. Says that for me is the hope.
It's just the idea that you can't solve a problem until you can define it correctly. And I think this book goes a long way towards defining it correctly. Mm-hmm. So to me, it was a step forward, not
Great.
just a rant.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. Somebody else? Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
One of you.
I'll go if I can. I guess I just want to make a different kind of comment on. I mean, I only read it once, and honestly, I read it like in a whirlwind, so I'm sort of in a fugue about it. But first of all, it's just incredibly written. It's beautifully written. It's like a poem practically in my mind. And I'm going to have to go back and read some of the criticism and some of the other things you're recommending, but I think it's just brilliant. What I got from it right now, anyway, is that we live in a dream, you know, and that we kind of need to break that down. You know, we being all of us in a way, and it's interesting. You know, I understand it's written to his son, and it's written more to the black community, but I think it's a book that, first of all, anybody who starts it has to finish it. You have to read the whole book, the whole book, because it's powerful in its entirety. And what I was getting from it partly, you know, as a white person, obviously, is that some of these forces, you know, and I think mostly about monetary things like that, this dream is to separate, you know, and so some of us have had those opportunities to live that dream and to believe in that dream. But I don't see it as unhopeful because I see it as like a shattering book in a way. I mean, it's just kind of shattered my thoughts right now, obviously. Right. But I see it in a very positive, shattering way if we heed it. And I am going to reread it because
obviously a lot of people are reading it. It's a New York Times bestseller list again. So a lot of people are reading, and a lot of white people are reading, which is great. I think he appreciate that, even though, as I said, it's written to his son. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't read it, because I think you will obviously get so much out of the book. And you know, so I appreciate you making that comment, because it is a powerful book and beautifully written. I agree, and a lot of the language is new. So I think you've picked up on some of the important parts of it. Yeah.
You relate this a little bit to poverty, whether it's black or poverty.
To poverty.
Whether it's black or white. Isn't it the black and the poor white have the same conditions as the poor black or blacks in general, because they are more
yeah.
poor in number.
Absolutely.
It seems to me that it's not only the color, it's also the economic situation where a family or a person is growing up. So if we improve the economic situation of those people, probably things will change a little.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Poverty is a major factor here. You know, and even when we talk about crime, I mean, crime is more likely to happen in a situation where people are poor. It just happens that we have an economic system that and a social system and a structure that discriminates against people of color, which puts them into poverty. And so then we change terms, and we say, oh, it's because they're black. We're really talking about poverty, but racism creates that whole situation of poverty and racism. Okay, but you're right, absolutely, that poverty is a major factor when you talk about crime. Somebody who hasn't.
You mentioned right in the beginning the race is sort of a social construct, or the white man created this race, or something along those lines. You mentioned right in the beginning.
Yeah.
I guess that's part of the book.
Right.
So related to that, me being brown, I always kind of wondered from the day one the Obama's name came into politics, why he calls himself a black. I mean, really, biologically speaking anyway, he's as much white as black. He has a black father and a white mother, and he was largely raised, I guess, or influenced, you can say, by a white mother. But yet, I guess not being pure white automatically.
Well, yeah, I don't think anybody's pure anything.
Is it a sort of a social mindset that if you're not white, then you have to be black?
Yeah. Well, again, we have to point to racism in our history. You know, the one-drop rule, that if you had some black blood in you, I mean, we were so racist that if you had black blood in you, you had to be considered black. I think each person can define themselves whichever way they want to. But this society says if your skin is dark, they're going to refer to you as non-white, okay, or black, or African American, or whatever you.
He just says black.
Yeah, right. That's fine. That's who he wants to be, which is fine. But there was a time, and there still is, when you had to be considered black, whether you wanted to or not. And black people come in all different shades and colors, you know, so it's hard to tell who is black from just from.
The social construct.
Yeah, right. You're absolutely. It's a social construct that has, you know, it doesn't make sense at all. You know, somebody else decided that who was going to be black, and people who used to be considered of color are now considered themselves white. I mean, Italians, some of the immigrant groups were always considered non-white, but now they're white. Jews had the same situation. So, you know, it's a social construct. Yes?
It's a social construct, but it's matched with another social construct of white privilege.
Sure.
So in its simple terms, two people walking down the street together, one white, one black, the identification of those people separately creates those social, you know, go in a store, who's going to be looked at, you know.
Right.
I mean, there's so many other things that go on with that, but that is...
Well, that's why you want to be considered white, because there is a privilege associated with it. It's capital. You can take it to the bank, you know. So you're absolutely right. That's way we've constructed, and we've done it for a reason. It's to make sure you maintain that privilege. Okay. One more? Anybody?
Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah. I wanted to say something that I thought might be paradoxical but hopeful. Because initially you talked about all the stuff that's been in the press. It's terrible stuff, the shootings, starting with Trayvon Martin and all. But you know, that has been going on for years.
Yeah.
And now we've had awareness because don't tell me it's truly started with Trayvon Martin. This has been going on for years. And same way with things in Flint, Michigan on a
Well, that's
no,
what I-
we don't know about what
Right.
happened. And I see that as, it's terrible, but it's hopeful to me that we're having dialogue about it and that we're now aware of this.
Yeah, you're absolutely. What I said originally was that the recent, involvement of a lot of people started with Trayvon Martin, but we all know that lynching and killings and the use of the criminal justice system to destroy people of color in this country has been here ever since we've been here. Okay, that is not new, but we do have new technology that allows us to become more aware of it. You've never been able to see the police officer actually, like in South Carolina, shoot a man in the back. So the new technology is making more people aware, and it's allowing more people to organize and protest some of the things that are happening, because now you can get people together and with a click of a button, that used to take so many hours of organizing and stuff like that. Okay.
Dialogue is dialogue, and poverty is poverty, whether it's white or black. And the best way to try to get out of poverty is the same as it's always been. It's education, and that's what's needed. A lot of people know that. This is certainly not an original thought, but that is probably the best answer, maybe not perfect answer, to lifting yourself up by your bootstraps, white or black or green or anything. That's how.
Well, I would argue that education and employment is more important. But there are people who, I think he mentions in the book, with master's and doctorate degrees who can't get jobs because you get discriminated against because you're of color.
That's an economic condition because we've lost so many millions of jobs over the last 30 years.
That's part of it.
That's
but
part of it.
We also discriminate in this country.
There will
Because
always be a group of people who dislike the other people, call it discrimination or whatever.
Yeah.
It's as old as the world.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate, but
Yeah, I guess if you're on the side of doing discriminating, it doesn't feel too bad.